She thought she married the man of her dreams, but behind the name Adrian Bell was her own brother, Thomas Marsh, wearing a mask of love, obsession, and betrayal. In the quiet town of Harrodsburg, Kentucky, where cornfields stretched endlessly and neighbors knew each other's middle names, the sudden marriage of Eleanor Marsh sent gentle ripples of gossip through the community. She had always been the reserved one, graceful in silence, committed to her routines. Every morning she opened the public library at 8 a.m. sharp, her cardigan sleeves always slightly rolled up, her hair tied in the same low bun. People liked her for her kindness, but she remained a mystery to most. Her life seemed carefully controlled, a life of lists and schedules, as if she was always one step away from slipping into chaos. So when word spread that Eleanor Marsh had married a British man named Adrian Bell, not even her closest friend at the library could believe it. There had been no mention of a relationship, no photos, no whispers of a romance. She had taken 2 weeks off, the first vacation she'd ever requested, and returned not with stories of sightseeing or souvenirs, but a plain gold band on her finger and a distant look in her eyes. Her neighbors tried to welcome Adrian Bell warmly. He was polite, charming even, with a vague accent that didn't quite match any known region of the UK. He smiled easily, but asked few questions. They rented a modest cottage at the edge of town, near the woods where the cell signal died and the streetlights didn't reach. He was rarely seen without sunglasses, even on overcast days. Eleanor barely spoke of him. When asked how they met, she simply said, "Online. It just happened." Her voice trembled slightly, like someone reciting a script they didn't write. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. 2 weeks later, she vanished. The library called her brother when she failed to show up. At first, Thomas Marsh was calm. Too calm, some thought. He told the police that Eleanor had always been impulsive, that maybe she'd gone on another trip, but he didn't sound convinced. Deep down, Thomas felt something was terribly wrong, and the silence in her house screamed louder than words. Her books were still stacked neatly on the bedside table, her toothbrush was wet, her phone charger was still plugged in, the cord loosely curled on the nightstand. Adrian said she left after an argument, that she packed a bag and walked away. He claimed he waited for her to return, thinking she needed space. But his version of the story shifted each time he told it. And most unsettling of all, he didn't call the police himself. As days turned into weeks, fear began to grow like a dark mold under the floorboards. The town that had once whispered about Eleanor's wedding now murmured about her disappearance. Thomas sat alone in her house, staring at her framed photo. There was something hollow inside him, a guilt he couldn't name, a memory he couldn't face. And in the quiet of that cold room, one thought pulsed louder than all the others. Something was terribly, unforgivably wrong. Thomas Marsh had always been seen as the steady one, reliable, measured, the kind of man who answered emails with perfect grammar and paid his bills early. After the disappearance of his sister, the town watched him closely, expecting the typical signs of grief, tears, breakdowns, desperate pleas. But Thomas didn't crumble. He didn't cry. He organized. He made calls. He contacted news stations and pressed the police for updates. He held a vigil in front of the library where Eleanor used to work, standing stiffly with a candle in his hand while others wept into their scarves. To the world, it looked like a portrait of quiet devastation. But something didn't fit. There was a stillness in Thomas that felt unnatural, as if he had rehearsed his sorrow. He always said the right things, but with a kind of mechanical polish. When reporters asked him about Eleanor, he described her in past tense too easily. She was gentle, she loved poetry, she trusted too easily. A brother clinging to hope would have said is not what. Behind closed doors, Thomas paced like a caged animal. He couldn't sleep. His mind spiraled back to the moment she told him she was getting married. There had been no warning, just a text. "I'm going away for a while. I'm getting married, Tom. I'll explain when I'm back." That message had torn through him like a blade. He had built his life around protecting Eleanor. She was all he had left. And she had gone behind his back to someone she barely knew. Someone who had stolen her away. When the police called him in for questioning, Thomas didn't flinch. He answered everything. Calm. Precise. He told them she hadn't seemed happy lately. That she had always struggled with anxiety. That maybe she was trying to escape something inside herself. But the investigators noticed something strange when they reviewed Eleanor's bank records. A shared savings account between her and Thomas, one that most siblings wouldn't normally have, had been drained of over $100,000 just 2 days after she vanished. Thomas claimed she gave him access years ago for emergencies, that she trusted him completely. But the digital records told a different story. The transaction had been processed from Eleanor's laptop using a Wi-Fi network registered to the cottage she shared with Adrian. The police couldn't say it outright, not yet. But they felt it. The timeline didn't add up. The stories were too clean, too rehearsed, and behind the composed face of Thomas Marsh, something cold flickered. He stood in front of his sister's house, late at night, the porch light flickering, the air thick with summer heat. He told himself he had done what he had to, that she had been slipping away, that she couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions. In the quiet of the night, he whispered words meant only for himself. No one would ever love her the way I did. Whatever truth he held inside, it stayed buried, like the woman he refused to grieve for. The small churchyard in Cornwall had stood for centuries, weathered by wind, rain, and time itself. Nestled on the edge of a cliff, it overlooked the crashing waves of the Atlantic, a place once meant for quiet reflection and forgotten graves. But in late October, that silence was broken when a groundskeeper noticed something strange behind the old chapel. A patch of soil recently disturbed had begun to sink. At first he thought it might be an animal, but the way the ground collapsed under his foot didn't feel right. The police arrived quietly, almost skeptically, unsure of what they were being called to. But as the soil was lifted and layers of earth peeled back, what lay beneath silenced even the most seasoned officers. A woman's body, wrapped crudely in what looked like a faded Kentucky state flag, lay curled into herself, as if she had died afraid. Her hands were bound, her fingers broken at unnatural angles, her hair was matted with blood. Her face, though damaged by decay, still carried the trace of something delicate, something once whole. British investigators worked methodically, puzzled by the foreign detail of the flag. Forensics soon confirmed the unimaginable. It was Eleanor Marsh. She had never been logged entering the UK, no passport records, no flights, no ferry. It was as if she had been smuggled into the country like contraband, her body placed carefully in a grave far from home. It wasn't just a killing, it was a vanishing, executed with a precision that chilled those involved. Not far from where she was found, buried deeper in the cold earth, was a worn duffel bag. Inside were blood-stained clothes, a cracked phone missing its battery, and a passport belonging to someone named Adrian Bell, the same man who married Eleanor. But when the photo was compared to identification records, everything unraveled. The passport was forged. The name didn't exist. Adrian Bell was a ghost. A detective on the case stared at the photo and whispered what everyone else was beginning to think. This man doesn't exist. Back in Kentucky, the news of Eleanor's discovery hit the town like a lightning strike. The people who once speculated about her vanishing now spoke in hushed tones. The story was no longer a disappearance. It was a murder, buried beneath the surface of 2 countries, 2 lives, and 1 monstrous lie. When they informed Thomas Marsh, he was quiet for a long time. Too quiet. He asked only one question: where exactly was she found? Not how, not when, not why. His voice never cracked. His eyes never wet, but in his chest, something coiled tightly. He had known the truth long before anyone else. He imagined her lying in that cold earth, oceans away, her last breath stolen in a place she didn't know. And yet, even now, a sliver of control clung to him. He hadn't just killed Eleanor. He had erased her, hidden her in the soil of another world. But the earth had spoken, and it had given her back. The truth began to unravel like thread from a tightly wound fabric, each discovery leading deeper into the hollow life of a man no one truly knew. When investigators turned their full attention to Adrian Bell, they expected to trace a real person, a passport, a birth record, a mother, a home. But every trail led to emptiness. There was no Adrian Bell in any UK registry, no driving license, no tax records. The passport used to enter the US was traced back to a dead soldier whose identity had been stolen years earlier. The man who married Eleanor Marsh was a ghost wrapped in skin and lies. Digital forensics found something even more disturbing. Photos of Adrian Bell, found on social media and dating platforms, were composites, altered images stitched from pieces of others, generated to look authentic but empty of real identity. Eleanor had married an illusion, and somewhere deep inside she may have realized it too late. British investigators combed through security footage from major ports, hoping to find a thread, and they did. On grainy video from a ferry arriving in Plymouth, a man disembarked wearing a black hat, dark sunglasses and a heavy coat. He kept his head down, walked with intent, and never looked up. Facial analysis revealed what investigators in Kentucky had begun to suspect. It wasn't Adrian Bell. It was Thomas Marsh. The revelation was monstrous. It wasn't just that Thomas had killed his sister, it was that he had invented a man, married her under that disguise, and lured her to a fate that no one, not even in nightmares, could have imagined. At first, those who knew Thomas refused to believe it. He had seemed broken when Eleanor vanished. He had spoken with conviction, with sorrow. But the pieces were fitting together now, and they formed a portrait of something deeply twisted. Thomas Marsh had been methodical, almost surgical, in how he built Adrian Bell. He used burner phones, offshore VPNs, and anonymous accounts. He crafted messages to Eleanor that mirrored her dreams, art, books, history. He knew what she longed for because he had raised her. He knew how she thought, what she feared, what would melt her walls. She had fallen in love with the perfect man, not knowing that every word had been designed by her own brother. There were signs she had grown suspicious. Investigators found unsent emails in her drafts, addressed to a friend, saying things didn't feel right. That Adrian sometimes said things only Thomas would say, that he watched her sleep, that he didn't want her to speak to anyone else. Her fear was beginning to rise, but she never had the chance to send those warnings. As the final pieces clicked into place, investigators felt the weight of the horror fully settle. This wasn't just a murder, it was psychological warfare. Eleanor had died not just at the hands of a brother, but in the arms of a false lover, one who had built a mask from her own trust, worn it close, and tightened it until she could no longer breathe. The truth came pouring out, not through confession, but from the dead spaces Thomas Marsh had failed to erase. When authorities searched his house in Kentucky, they expected digital evidence, documents, perhaps a travel record. But what they found was much older, much more damning. Handwritten letters, dozens of them, tied in neat bundles and tucked away in a locked chest under his bed. They were letters written by Eleanor Marsh, her handwriting delicate, spiraling with hope and heartbreak. Each letter read like a cry from a cage. She spoke of growing up in a house where silence was enforced, where Thomas controlled the thermostat, the groceries, books she read. After their parents died in a car accident when she was just 13, Thomas became her guardian. At 19, he should have been barely holding himself together, but instead he stepped into the role with disturbing ease. He pulled her out of school and told her it was for safety. He said the world was cruel, that people only wanted to hurt her, that he was the only one who truly loved her, and Eleanor believed him. At first, she mistook it for devotion. He cooked her meals, drove her everywhere, made sure she never had to face the harsh world. But as she grew older, her letters shifted. The tone changed. She began to see it for what it was, control. She had no friends, no freedom, no voice of her own. Even the clothes she wore were chosen by him. He read her journal entries. He had surveillance software installed on her laptop, masked as antivirus protection. One letter, barely legible with tear-stained ink, described how she finally met someone online, not Adrian but a real man named Chris. She never met him in person. The moment she started chatting with him regularly, Thomas cut off the Wi-Fi for the house and accused her of betrayal. The next day, her phone went missing. She wrote about feeling like a prisoner in her own skin, constantly second-guessing her thoughts, because Thomas had taught her to doubt them. Her dreams of moving away, studying literature, or traveling to Europe were dismissed as fantasies. He told her she was fragile, too anxious to survive alone. But one final letter, found torn, crumpled beneath the others, revealed the most haunting truth. She had discovered something on his computer, a fake profile, one she had unknowingly messaged months earlier under the name Adrian Bell. The same phrases, the same humor, the same obsession with the books only Thomas ever recommended, and in that letter, she wrote the words that made every investigator's blood run cold. "I think he's pretending to be someone else. I don't feel safe anymore. I'm afraid of him." That was dated 6 days before she vanished. Thomas, in his twisted mind, believed he had built the perfect world. That if he couldn't keep Eleanor as a sister, he could possess her in another form, through fantasy, through fabrication, through force. He had convinced himself it was love. But it was never love. It was ownership. And when she tried to escape, he didn't let her go. He ended her story, so he could remain its author. They found Thomas Marsh in Boston, just before sunrise. He was standing in line at the harbor, waiting to board a cruise ship under a false name, holding a passport that looked real to anyone who didn't know what to look for. He had dyed his hair, trimmed his beard, and lost weight. But beneath the disguise, the same cold stillness clung to him. He didn't resist when officers approached. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hands slowly and looked past them, as if he were already somewhere far away. The arrest sent shockwaves across 2 nations. In Kentucky, where Eleanor Marsh was once known as the shy librarian, with the gentle smile, people lit candles again, this time not in hope, but in mourning. Across the Atlantic in Cornwall, the quiet churchyard where her body had been hidden became a site of grief for strangers who had never met her. The trial was swift but unbearable. Prosecutors presented the letters, the forged documents, the travel records, the facial recognition evidence, but it was the story itself that held the courtroom captive. The unimaginable descent from guardian to predator, from protector to murderer. Each detail peeled back another layer of horror. Every quiet action of Thomas Marsh, once seen as composed grief, now looked like ice. He showed no emotion as the judge read out the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, no flicker of guilt, no sign of remorse, just a long, blank stare forward. His lawyer said he had suffered psychological trauma after the loss of their parents, that he became twisted by grief. But those who heard the evidence knew this went beyond tragedy. This was obsession, and it had stolen a life. In the UK, a coroner's inquest was held in parallel. They declared Eleanor's death a homicide committed by her brother, and issued a posthumous apology from the British government for the delay in her discovery. Her remains were released and reburied under her real name, this time with a proper headstone and fresh flowers laid by the locals who had come to her as their own. A woman who had lived a life so small, so carefully controlled, was now remembered across borders, as a symbol of how hidden cruelty can fester quietly, and how sometimes the greatest danger lives within the walls we trust. Her grave rests beneath an old willow tree, the stone carved simply, "Eleanor Marsh, beloved and free." Visitors come often. Some bring books she might have loved. Others simply sit with her, as if to say, she's no longer alone. Back in his prison cell, Thomas Marsh sits in silence. No visitors, no letters. He lives now in a world of locked doors and fluorescent lights. a place where control is stripped away, and time stretches endlessly. And though he will never say it, not aloud, something eats at him from within. The knowledge that for all the plans he made, the disguises he wore, and the lies he told, the earth still gave Eleanor back. And in doing so, it told the world everything.